Mercedes and I have a bit of a history on the channel. To be fair, I started it. I made a video complaining about how she is, in my opinion, the worst student from a gameplay perspective and close to the worst unit. I was, perhaps, a little unnecessarily mean in the way that I pointed out that Anna contributes more to the average one than Mercedes does, or the way in which I insulted her extremely lacking spell list or criticized her for starting with D-rank Faith. I still believe everything I said in that video to be true, but I could have phrased it a little bit nicer. There is a dark secret behind my meanness, however. When I first played Three Houses, I found Mercedes to be a little bit boring, and she doesn't impress on the battlefield, so she was consistently a character that I dropped. Like, I didn't hate her or anything, I just enjoyed spending time with the students I found more interesting more. And I'll be honest, that's kind of a shame, because ever since my patrons voted for me to look into her for the next character analysis, I've really started to like Mercedes. And I'll be honest, I see a lot of myself in her. I'm very absent-minded, place a huge value on kindness, but often fail to show that kindness to myself, all of which are traits who describe Best Girl Mercedes. I mean, heck, I spent so long tearing her down, but my performance on the battlefield would probably be even worse. I walk with a cane, I would definitely have 3 movement. So I guess you can consider this the beginning of the channel's Mercedes redemption arc. No, I still don't think she's a good unit, but I will spend this entire video gushing over her character, the strengths in its writing, and how she stands out from some of the more, shall we say, eccentric members of Fodlan by being a more grounded character who nonetheless has a significant amount of trauma, but whose serious nature allows us to examine that trauma without it necessarily feeling like a parody in the way that characters like Bernadetta often can. But before we get started, I do want to take a moment to thank my Patreons, including the pre-promotes Jamie Collins, Marin Karen, Thick Mulder, George Grenville the 7th PM, Danielle Kalaskas, Anya, Emery Lafleur, and Tailored Muffin. They voted for Mercedes, and without them doing so, I wouldn't have dove into her character and found a new favorite from Three Houses. If you are interested in supporting the channel, there is a link below. I've got a couple of benefits associated with Patreon members, and as of right now, there is a poll to decide on the next topic for SRPG Sapphics, so if you want your voice to be heard, that is the best way to do so. I do also want to thank fellow YouTuber Collector Togami. They uploaded all of the supports for Fire Emblem Three Houses on their YouTube channel, and those were a huge resource because there were a couple of entries in Mercedes' support log that I didn't have unlocked, and rather than having to do an entire playthrough just to get the last 3 support conversations, I was able to watch the videos instead. Their channel is linked below. They typically have all of the support conversations very timely after Fire Emblem games come out, so go ahead and give them a subscription if you are interested in that sort of content. With all of that out of the way, let's take a dive into Mercedes. Part 1. An unorganized look at Mercedes. Despite the fact that I don't script these videos, I normally try to add some semblance of organization to them and have a general idea of what I'm going to say before I sit down to record. However, in honor of Mercedes', how shall we say, absent-mindedness, I think I'm going to approach this one with a more free-form discussion. I still have notes from all of my research into her supports, boss conversations, and parrot endings, but I don't have as much structure as I usually approach when recording these. And since I mentioned Mercedes' absent-mindedness, I figured that's a great place to start. There are plenty of examples within Mercedes' support chains of her absent-mindedness. Felix complains about how he needs to save her life because she doesn't pay attention on the battlefield. While cooking, Mercedes accidentally mixes ingredients and makes smoke bombs in the kitchen. She nearly falls asleep while talking to Ferdinand because she zones out from boredom, although honestly, who can blame her? She tells Byleth about the time she forgot to get dressed and just walked outside in her underpants, and is completely oblivious to Hilda's attempts to manipulate her into doing chores. And her C support with Dimitri is prompted by the fact that she completely forgot about an upcoming exam until it's only a few hours away. This extreme time blindness is a pattern that we see elsewhere as well. For example, when Mercedes and Annette go shopping, they just completely lose track of time together. While gardening, Mercedes allows the entire day to pass her by and thinks it's only been about an hour. And as someone whose ADHD makes it so I regularly sit down to edit videos and then look at the clock and realize it's been 6 hours and I haven't done as much work as I wanted to, yeah, I can relate to this. In fact, the more I looked into Mercedes as a character, the more I found she had many qualities that I was able to relate to. For example, the extremely high value she places on kindness to others. We can see this in her support with Cyril, where after finding him sleeping in the library, she recognizes he doesn't have any friends, and decides to care for him as an older sister would. It's likely that the reason she recognized Cyril's need for help was that she has a deep empathy for everyone, and is basically always able to tell when people are in distress, as she reveals to Byleth in their C support. Because of this overwhelming amount of empathy, her dream is, in her words, to simply help people with their troubles. And she puts this into practice by playing therapist to some of the other students in Karakmok Monastery. In her support with Ignatz, she gives him the gentle push that he needs in order to follow his dream of becoming an artist, despite the fact that he's insecure in his abilities and feels pressured by his father to pursue a path other than art. When Dedue is on the edge of an existential abyss, she calms him by telling him Dusker is gone but you're still here, which he repeats to himself as kind of a mantra after she leaves. Mercedes is also able to help Ingrid, serving in this relationship as a sort of sounding board that Ingrid can vent to in order to sort of unload the trauma that she has over marriage proposals. And despite her initial misgivings about his character, Mercedes is even willing to play therapist to Sylvain, helping him cope with the extremely complicated trauma he has around his brother. But if we're going to talk about Blue Lions and trauma, we kind of can't avoid talking about the house leader, Dimitri, and the way in which Mercedes approaches and deals with his particular trauma response is, at least in my opinion, the best example of Mercedes' mastery of the power of kindness. The White Cloud section of their support chain is simple enough. Dimitri is trying to teach Mercedes how to sword fight and she kind of sucks at it, and in exchange Mercedes tries to teach Dimitri how to sew, but he also kind of sucks at it. On its own, it's a completely fine support chain, contrasting Dimitri's prowess on the battlefield to Mercedes' prowess off of it. But in between this, there are several instances of Mercedes pushing Dimitri not to give in to despair, and speaking out as a voice against his negative self-talk, pointing out the ways in which he's improved and giving him praise without being patronizing. Her non-judgmental nature makes Dimitri comfortable enough to open up about one of the root causes of his self-loathing, his family life, or lack thereof. And Mercedes continues to be a supportive presence in Dimitri's life, even after the, shall we say, minor backslide in mental health progress that occurs in between Part 1 and Part 2 of Three Houses. At a time where everyone, including Dimitri himself, would describe Dimitri as a monster, Mercedes instead chooses to extend kindness. She sees the man behind the monster, and the reasons why he performs such monstrous acts. And while I personally don't believe that Dimitri's good intentions excuse his bad actions, I do think that that is what he needed to hear, and Mercedes was there to provide him with that wisdom, as well as to push him out of living in the past. She's able to get Dimitri to open up about his fear of forgetting the dead, and pushes him to live in the present rather than dwelling in the past, telling him that no matter what he does, he will not be able to relive it. In this way, she is both kind and forceful, simultaneously welcoming to his emotions while not backing down in her support, and this is also reflected in the way that she firmly rejects his self-deprecation. In fact, one of the few instances in the entire game where Mercedes raises her voice involves her yelling at Dimitri for him calling himself a monster. She wants to protect her friend from himself because she knows full well where this self-loathing leads. And the reason she knows that is she's been there. Because for as seemingly natural as kindness to others comes to Mercedes, she really struggles to be kind to herself, and can frequently be seen making self-deprecating comments. She is incredibly harsh on herself for her absent-mindedness, harsher than any of her peers with the exception of Felix, who is mostly only angry because she almost got herself killed. Throughout her support conversations and monastery conversations, Mercedes is pretty frequently insulting herself, saying things such as, "Being me is more trouble than it's worth," "I'd probably slow you down," "I'm not worth talking to," and "I always mess everything up." These are exactly the sort of things that she would yell at her peers for saying about themselves, and yet Mercedes' self-esteem is so low that she doesn't transfer that same kindness to herself, and in fact seems almost unwilling to accept the possibility that others would be kind to her either. Towards the end of her support conversation with Ferdinand, he secures some documents that would let her escape the influence of her abusive adoptive father. However, she rejects this help from him, stating in one of the most heartbreaking lines of the game, "I've spent so much time following everyone else's lead, so much that I've come to terms with it." While on the surface this is presented as a sort of victory, a positive way of forging her own path rather than relying on Ferdinand's help, I think that there is a more sinister and tragic undertone to it. You see, like most students at Garrick Mach, prior to the events of the game, Mercedes underwent multiple traumatic incidents, involving members of both her biological and adoptive family. And while we don't get all of the details within the game, we get enough to have a general picture of what had happened. My interpretation is that this willingness to let herself be abused comes from the immense amount of guilt and self-loathing that originated from these trauma points. And well, it wouldn't be a Three Houses character analysis if we didn't have a section just titled Trauma. Part 2. Trauma. To the best of my knowledge, we never get a full idea of what Mercedes' trauma entails specifically, but we do get a general idea of all of the most important points, and so I will focus on those in retelling this. Shortly after Mercedes was born, her father died and her mother remarried into Baron Bartels' family. As is the case with many nobles, he didn't actually care about his wife, he simply wanted to give birth to a child with a crest. When he got one, in the form of Mercedes' brother Emil, he revealed himself to be a cruel man, and the way that he treated both Mercedes and her mother was abusive. We do not know the specific details of the abuse, although it's likely that it was violent and potentially deadly, as Mercedes and her mother fled in the middle of the night, fearing for their lives. They left Emil behind, and Mercedes felt an immense amount of guilt for this. She was not aware that staying behind was his idea, and even after she found out, she still felt guilty for not taking him with them. After all, he was then left in the hands of the abusive man who continued to abuse him. This played a significant part in Emil becoming the Death Knight, as we learn in their support conversation, where he reveals to Mercedes that the reason he took his first kills, which were of Baron Bartels and the rest of the family, was because he had learned that Bartels had located Mercedes and Mercedes' mother and planned to take them back so that he could have a child with Mercedes. Emil killed his father in order to prevent his sister's rape. However, this is what awakened his ceaseless bloodlust and the Death Knight persona within him. On her end, Mercedes' safety was short-lived, as she was eventually adopted by a merchant who also wanted to improve his status by using her crest. He became incredibly controlling of Mercedes, attempting to marry her off in order to improve his status in a similar manner to the way that Ingrid's family wanted to marry her off. In moving from one abusive and controlling father to another, Mercedes became, in her own words, used to being controlled. Because the authority figures around her did not view her as a full person, I don't think she views herself that way, at least on some subconscious level, and this is why she has so much trouble extending the kindness that she gives to others to herself. She views everyone else as a person deserving of kindness, but can't view herself as a person deserving of kindness. In combination with the guilt she feels for leaving behind Emil, it's no wonder she's so mean to herself. I would also posit that this trauma, at least in part, contributes to her immense kindness towards others and her desire to help other people. And the reason I feel that way is, well, I see a lot of myself in Mercedes. For those who are not aware, prior to being a YouTuber, I spent over 10 years working in the mental health field. My intense desire to help others and my above average amount of empathy, I believe, come from my own family trauma, which, while not identical to Mercedes, does have some similarities, which I will not dive into because it's personal. Much like her, I channel my pain into making sure others don't need to go through the same level of pain that I did. And much like her, I struggle to extend that same amount of kindness to myself, although I am getting better at it. Now, with this alone, you might think that I'm projecting a little bit, putting my own life experience onto Mercedes and interpreting her motivation based on that. However, the reason that I am at least fairly confident that Mercedes' trauma is a big motivation in her overwhelming focus on kindness is I'm not the only person like this in the mental health field. In fact, this experience is so common that the counseling community has a term for it: wounded healers. The idea is that our empathy pushes us in a position to try to leverage our trauma to prevent the same level of harm to others, and in turn, this can sometimes help with the healing process. And we do see this to an extent through Mercedes, as while some of her support chains do still end with her being down on herself, such as the aforementioned Ferdinand support, others have her in a more positive place. Through uplifting Dmitri and helping him tackle his own trauma, she also comes better to terms with herself and is less self-detrimental. In a similar vein, her support chain with Ash leads to her being more kind to herself. She recognizes that she is trying and is willing to continue trying and improving. She doesn't seek perfection and won't hold herself to that impossible standard. And in her support chain with Felix, she's able to recognize that her attachment to him as a brother doesn't actually have anything to do with him, but more her longing and guilt that she feels over her brother. Of course, if we are going to talk about the way that Mercedes' guilt over the fate of Emil affects her, then we do need to touch upon another support chain of hers, the support between her and Jurica, because spoilers if you haven't played Three Houses, Emil is Jurica. Now, if only we knew who the Death Knight was. It's here that Mercedes reveals she blames herself for the creation of the Death Knight, saying that she and her mother leaving Emil behind is the reason why he manifested that alternate personality. The abuse was too much and they knew it would be the case. She even offers for Emil to kill her in recompense, which is, shall we say, not the healthiest response? This is definitely where Mercedes is at her lowest in terms of self-esteem, but Emil actually pushes back on that and snaps out of the Death Knight persona, telling her that he is the one who volunteered to stay back, despite the fact that she believed they just left him behind. He wanted to protect them and felt that that was the best way to do so, since he knew that Baron Martels would never stop chasing them if they took his only Crestborn child with them. It is here also that Jurica reveals that he became the Death Knight in order to protect Mercedes. His first kill was killing his father in order to stop the rape of Mercedes. However, this let the demon out and the demon kills indiscriminately now. My interpretation is that this demon is metaphorical, but it's kinda hard to tell. Three Houses isn't great at explaining things around the Death Knight. He's kind of just supposed to be a spooky skull man. The way that Mercedes reacts to this information is very interesting, as in many ways, Jurica is a much more extreme version of Dimitri. He kills far more indiscriminately and seems to kill simply for the joy of killing, but the original reason, the reason that he became the Death Knight, is much more noble than Dimitri's. At least in my opinion, because Dimitri is killing to please the dead, whereas Jurica is killing to protect the living. Specifically his sister. From the way that Mercedes basically absolved Dimitri of guilt by saying that he's not a monster, you would expect a similar response to Jurica, and yet her response to him is much more tempered. She does still meet his monstrosity with kindness, but she never acknowledges the reason for his killing was a noble one, as she explicitly does for Dimitri. Instead, she expresses that she trusts him and wants him to stay nearby, and that even if he kills her, she will be happy because she got to spend some more time with him. The fact that she goes out of her way to acknowledge Dimitri's noble reasons, but not Jurica's, may seem a little inconsistent. However, my interpretation is that she's too close to the situation. She still feels guilt because Jurica's noble reasons were specifically to protect her. She can show him kindness, but she can't explicitly show him forgiveness, as that would require some degree of self-forgiveness, and for all of the growth that Mercedes does throughout the story of Three Houses, she's still not capable of that. It's honestly really heart-wrenching, although this is appropriately tragic for Three Houses. I like to believe that decades later, when they are reunited in their paired ending, they are able to resolve things a little bit better, and Mercedes is able to both forgive herself and her brother, but maybe that's just wishful thinking. Trauma sticks with you deep, and all you can do is be with the people you love and keep moving forward. On the topic of people she loves, let's talk about the gay stuff. Part 3. Our Bisexual Queen. It's kind of odd to go this far into an episode of SRPG Sapphics not talking about any queer issues, but it is also a bit of a relief. Mercedes is a fully fleshed out character who doesn't have queerness at the center of her identity. Her low self-esteem, her obsession with kindness, her religion, and her relationship with her brother and her trauma are all fully fleshed out portions of her character. It's nice not to have the gay character be a gimmick character, because oftentimes in representation, the few queer characters we get are just an queer character, and that is the only thing there is to them. Mercedes instead presents a large amount of depth, to the degree that I can speak for 20 minutes about her without ever once mentioning her sexuality. That being said, she also avoids the pitfall in the opposite direction. Mercedes is not simply a queer person you could ignore the queerness of. The most important non-familial relationship in her life is with another woman, and I posit that it is a romantic one. While Annette is never explicitly confirmed to be queer, and they refer to their relationship as a friendship, there are plenty of romantic elements to this friendship. After all, when they recover from their lover's quarrel, Annette tells Mercedes that she loves her more than just about anything in the world, well, other than cookies. It's a goofy game, okay? While this could feasibly be written off as platonic love, their paired ending really can't be. Depending on whether you sided with or against Edelgard, Mercedes will either be a nun in the church or running an orphanage. Either way, she has a humble life accomplishing her dream of helping others. Annette, on the other hand, has a fairly well-paying job in the School of Sorcery. The two of them exchange letters every day, to the degree that they feel like they are living side by side. Eventually, Annette decides that they want to be living side by side, and so she quits her job, moves in with Mercedes, and they live an extremely humble but extremely happy life in either the orphanage or the church. And I don't want to undervalue long-distance friendships, because they do happen, they are important, and they can be very fulfilling. However, I feel like if you are at the point where you are exchanging letters on a daily basis and then one of you retires from your job in order to move halfway across the world to live with the other one despite the fact that they don't really have some sort of prestigious or high-paying position, I feel like y'all are gay, right? I know historians will call them roommates, but can we at least acknowledge that they're wives? Her ending with Constance could similarly be read as queer. I think there's a lot less evidence for it personally, but it does state that they moved from being friends to being basically family, and you could interpret that as a marriage of sort. I think of it more as a sisterly relationship, but all interpretations are valid. But Mercedes is a multisexual queen, so it's not just women that she can wed. She has several potential husbands as well, such as Dimitri, Ferdinand, and my personal favorite, Didu. I find their support chain to be incredibly sweet, with her kindness and curiosity re-inspiring his interest in Dusker culture, and the fact that once they get married, they open a school specifically for Dusker children in order to educate them in Dusker history is just really adorable. I love it. Another chain worth mentioning is her support line with Lawrence, and while I personally do not like them getting paired together, I love how early in the support chain she will call him out on his womanizing tactics, saying that she's not as naive as he thinks she is. It's really funny. I don't have too much more to say in this section. I think her relationships both with men and women are well fleshed out to the extent that it doesn't feel like they just tacked the queer label onto her, but at the same time her queerness is not the center of her identity, and she gets to be a fully fleshed out character instead of just the bisexual one. With all of that, I think we're ready to move on to the concluding thoughts. My final thoughts. It's funny. When Three Houses first came out, Mercedes was one of my least favorite characters. I didn't dislike her by any means, but I just found her incredibly boring. Yes, she's very nice, yes, she's very religious, and yes, she is a healer. This is something we've seen before in all sorts of Fire Emblem characters. Be it Ellen, Natasha, whoever. It's been done a million times. Honestly, it's to the extent that I was confused when talking about her unit performance with the number of people who would say she's pairball as a unit, but I like her as a character, because I kind of thought that she was boring as both. With this in mind, I was kind of dreading the inevitable SRPG Sapphics on Mercedes, thinking that I would struggle to come up with things to say about her. As evidenced from this video, this couldn't be further from the truth. In doing a deep dive into her character, I came to realize that not only is there a bunch of hidden depth TM, but also I actually really like this character. I'm gonna say it, alright? I think Mercedes might actually be my favorite Three Houses character now, and possibly a top 10 or top 5 Fire Emblem character of all time. I really like her, okay? And I never would have discovered all of this stuff about her if I hadn't tried to do a deep dive into her character. Yes, she's kind, but the way in which she channels that power of kindness to help the people she cares about is really unique. Yes, she's religious, but the source of that religion is that the only safe spot she had in between points of abuse in her life was when she was living in the church with her mother. Additionally, her lack of self-esteem and the self-deprecating comments are definitely a lot more noticeable when you take a holistic look at Mercedes as opposed to just when she throws out one or two in an entire support chain. As lackluster as her gameplay performance is, I can honestly forgive it because of how well it ties into her characterization. She starts with no attacking spells because they didn't want to give her anything that could hurt people, because she really doesn't want to hurt people because of her overwhelming empathy. The personal ability Live to Serve reflects her journey of self-healing through healing others. And the fact that the big payoff for training her faith to rank A is a AoE heal is reflective of the desire to help everyone around her. Mercedes' life is complicated. She is deeply informed by her trauma, looks for the best in people, including her monstrous brother, and tries to find a way to offer them forgiveness that she can't give herself. I would like to give everyone a big thank you for making it this far into the video. And shout out my patrons again, y'all are awesome. If you liked what you saw and are interested in more queer Fire Emblem content, go ahead and hit the like and subscribe buttons, it helps the channel out a lot. Let me know in the comments what you think about Mercedes. Is there something I missed that you would have liked me to expand on? Something you disagree with, or an interpretation you have that I didn't touch upon? And let me know what other queer Fire Emblem characters you like. I've got a poll going for the next episode on the Patreon, which is linked below, but I'm always looking for new ideas. I love diving into the gayer aspects of this series. Regardless of what you choose to do, however, have a wonderful day. Be kind to yourself and be kind to each other. Mercedes would want it that way.